Hello everyone, we are Geeks Not Nerds. I'm Captain Logan. Wait for it. And I'm Vince! And today, we are talking about a question that came from the multi-topic extravaganza. Today, our question comes from David Smiley, Vince, who asks if we would talk some more about outlining. He says, would you talk some more about outlining, as it's not something I do. I tend to do more of a free-flowing thing. So could you give some pros and cons to outlining in both the initial writing phase and the revision phase? This is something that we talked about somewhat at length on our last episode of the multi-topic extravaganza from this year, and we thought that we would extrapolate on it even further. This is a thing that I have always thought about doing a whole show on, and that'd be really cool to do that. So, like I said, we did talk about that a little bit last time. But if you didn't get a chance to see that, we will kind of revisit a little bit of what we said there, and then go even farther with it. Are you ready, Vince?
I'm ready, kids.
Where I came down on this last week was basically I often don't like the idea of outlining in fiction rigorously to the point where you don't let yourself get away from the outline, because then it's plot driven, or it can be plot driven before it's character driven. And I used to be like really anti-outline, and over the years I've seen a lot of different methods that people have used for writing, and I've gotten a little bit more open-minded about it, and I kind of see why some people work that way and how it can be effective. What do you think, Vince?
I've always loved outlines, and the thing about it is that I will get obsessed over an idea, and then I'm like, well, does that work? And then what I'll do with an outline is I'll have like an initial structure, a thing that I expect to happen. And then I'll kind of go through and say, well, what would a person choose to do at this point? Like, what would be my next move if I had this guy's morality? And then I would write that into my outline. So that's how, in my mind, you keep it character-driven as opposed to plot-driven, because it's not just object blows up, thing happens. It's character makes decision, we move to the next step. And if that ultimately leads to the ending that is different from what I originally put into the outline, I'll change what's in the outline, and then I'll start writing, because, again, I get obsessed about an idea, and then I have to essentially write it before I write it, but it's all in bullet points.
Yeah, and I love that you said that, because that's where I was going to go with this. The distinction between rigidly outlining and basically actually writing the story through the outline. I think there's a distinction. I think these are different things where it's not a matter of just saying this happens and then this happens. It's a matter of, while you're outlining, you actually are more or less writing the story, and then you're filling in the details later. Now, I don't work that way, but I think it has less to do with what is more effective and more to do with what is more effective for you. I think it depends on what kind of a brain you have, how structured you are. It makes perfect sense that I'm the kind of person that more or less likes to sit down and just let it come naturally, versus somebody like Vince, who is a lot more structured just in general. Yeah. Than I am. I mean, you're a really organized kind of guy, and I'm not. So I think a lot of this is just about our chemical makeup.
Like, all my comics are in one spot. They're all alphabetized. I got them in drawers.
See, I find outlining to be kind of often kind of a dull, meticulous thing. It feels like it feels kind of cold and unemotional, and like it's hard for me, because what I find is, and I've even had this with other things that aren't fiction writing, like Rewind and stuff like that, where sometimes I have to make a lot of notes for myself before I start writing, because it's like ideas come to me and I want to make sure I don't forget them, so I get them in there. But if I start outlining even something like that, Vince, I find I'm just writing it as I'm going, and I don't mean like figuring it out and then filling in the details. I mean, the details are all there. By the time I'm finished outlining, I've already written it. Like, it's done.
My outlines, they kind of work in a similar process. The difference is that when I start writing, I feel like I end up with this word vomit, and if I don't have a surefire place to go, I'm going to have to stop. I'm going to say, you know what, I need to back myself off from this, because obviously I don't know where I'm going with it. And so when I would write something in, I would write ideas down for myself, and my outline initially just looks like random things that I've had thoughts on. And a lot of them start with the word maybe. And,
Interesting. Okay.
and then eventually my notes get reorganized, and then I'm like, well, this makes sense, and then the maybe goes away, and I'm like, well, this is going to happen. This would be a choice that would follow what happens here, and then I would put that thing up underneath it, and then I would start developing the outline based on those notes, and eventually things start getting deleted, things start getting rearranged, and then sometimes, like, I guess in my head, the way I've always handled an outline was I would get to the ending where I thought it was going to go, and then I would think to myself, well, I could see a couple of different endings. Let's just go from there.
Yeah.
So there's where I go a little bit more freeform. But I have always had difficulty staying focused on the task, because then I feel like I'm going nowhere. And, and maybe I'm talking a little too much right now, but I've felt like a lot of amateur writers, part of the problem is, and I think it's kind of the nature of the beast getting started, is a lot of things are meandering. They just go all over the place, and then a lot of it is not pertinent to the rest of the story. So then there's this guy, we have this entire thing about, how he likes to hunt whales, and then we have this entire thing about what whales do in the ocean, and it's...
poor Melville. We take pot shots at Melville all the time.
It's not pertinent to the story, and I'm like, let's go back and let's read about that dude. I want to call him Ishmael. Come on.
Hey, I felt that way about Michael Crichton before, and I think Michael Crichton's a wonderful writer. But
I know. I just wanted to say that.
But no, you're absolutely right. Some of it has to do with just your approach, like your personal, like just what your personality is. Because like some of us, I feel like. See, I'm trying to decide if it's that, or if it's more just like what your experience is. Because you get really experienced and you write a lot, and you get to a point where you do a lot of that organization naturally. Or is it just based on how your brain works? You see what I'm saying? Because I kind of just structure on the fly, so I don't feel the need to do all that. As I'm, and I think that's the reason that I say as I'm writing, my stuff doesn't tend to get so meandery, and that's what revision is for. You know what I mean? Like I always tell people, and this is still advice I give people, but like I said, I'm trying to be a little bit careful with it now, because I also get that approach too. It's just not the way I would do it. Where a lot of people are so worried that what they're gonna throw on the page is gonna be a whole bunch of nonsense that, as you said, they can't get started. Mm-hmm. So I always tell people get yourself into the groove. Start writing. Let it be nonsensical. Let it be all over the place, and then center yourself. Because I find that I get more focused and centered as I'm working. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my best ideas, and I don't think this is true for everybody necessarily, I don't know, but a lot of my best ideas don't come, as I've said before, when I'm like in the shower or whatever. They come while I'm doing the job. And they come from that character-driven place. Like, I get to know my characters through the writing. And so that's why outlining is a thing that comes much less naturally to me than simply writing the thing. Because I don't know who the characters are until I start putting words in their mouths, and until I start getting those details in. So I mean, like, it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. You know what I mean? Where we were always told in writing school, Vince, you don't put in any details that don't reveal something. Okay, right. Does that characterization, does who that person is come from the details, or do you know it already and then you add in the details? Do you give do you give that person stuff in their purse, stuff in their kitchen, habits, thoughts, whatever it is that they have, based on who you know they are already? Or do you start giving them things, and then they come alive for you through those things? For me, it's the second thing, and that's why outlining doesn't work for me as well. And there's also a difference between outlining and planning. I want to throw that out there.
I also kind of think, like, for me, I don't trust myself to not remember the thing that I want to happen, or that I know needs to happen.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'm like, I know this is inevitably going to go here. And, I mean, not necessarily like an end, but the end of a scene. If I don't write it down, if I don't structure it, I'm going to forget it. And,
I work from memory a lot. Like a lot of times, I'm worried I'll forget those things. Mm-hmm. And I think I will, but then it comes back to me because I put things in a place where, for me, there's only one logical place to go. And if you're writing toward that logical place in the first place, you're not going to. No, I'm not saying don't make notes. I should make more notes than I do. And I have a tendency. I don't want to mix this too much with review, but just these things are similar in some ways. When I'm working on a rewind or something, I take copious amounts of notes so that I remember things, and I almost never refer back to them. And inevitably, every time I go back to a review, after like a little while after I've done it, there's always 2 or 3 things, and I'm like, oh yeah, totally meant to put that in there. So like, I should be more organized, but I also think that being too stringently organized can hamper the craft.
Yeah, then people become robots. I'm going to do this activity now.
But not just being robots, Vince, but like stalling yourself out where like you psych yourself out.
You know, I do sometimes I've gotten to the point where I do psych myself out, because I'll get somewhere, I'll start writing something, and then when I really get into a new detail, something that was not planned, I'll kind of delve into that thing, and then I have to go, well, this outline's crap, and then I go back in and start doing other stuff in my outline. That's me making an outline.
Yeah, but I think that's a good way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, I did all this, and that's why I said in the multi-topic was that if you're going to make an outline, like a rigid outline, I want to make something that has every detail in it that I know that I'm going to need to know to fully recognize this piece, then you have to not be afraid that you're going to do a little extra work. For me, it's more exhausting to do an intensive revision, because then I'm basically just rewriting it, than I am if I'm going through and... Well, but on that same note...
But a lot of the time it's inevitable. I mean, you're not going to know in the moment just how much revision you're going to need no matter which course you take.
That's true.
You know, you may come back to it a month later, and I always suggest that people, take some time away from their work and distance them from it, and come back to it and read it with fresh eyes. And when you do that, you're likely, no matter how meticulous you were about that, Vince, you're likely to come back and be like, this whole section needs to be scrapped or changed or reworked or whatever it is. I think that's likely to happen to you whether or not you use an outline.
And another thing is, it's not your baby. You know what I mean? You gotta be willing to scrap things.
Absolutely, sure. But that's why I think that you should be more liberal about the words you put on the page in the first place, and then take a hacksaw to it.
Pare it down, huh?
Yeah, because it's much, much easier to pare it down than it is to add things.
This is true.
I mean, you can also add things, but you see what I'm saying? Like it's like I don't know. I always encourage people to not be too worried about being all over the place. Even if you don't have a logical progression in the first place. First of all, if you do it a lot, and if you read a lot, you read a lot of good things, well written things, you just naturally start to get ahead for here's what logical progression of a narrative looks like. Here's what logical progression in a paragraph looks like. This sentence naturally follows this sentence, naturally follows this sentence. That might not come to you naturally right away, or even if it usually does, you might sit down, not really know exactly what you're wanting to put down on the page, but as you get going, that form starts to come together more. So you'll look at your first couple paragraphs and be like, this is total bunk, but this stuff really worked. I mean, I also tell people that it's important to, when you... I lost my train of thought. Sorry, go ahead.
You know, I feel like I'm generally a big advocate for the outlining thing, but something that I think is kind of important to recognize is that if you do make that outline your baby, if you go through everything in there and you feel like everything's perfect when you write it on the page, there's a good chance that you're just going to do this like a paint by numbers from the thing that you did originally. It's not going to be like true paint. It's not going to be something that's really getting to the crux of a character.
Yeah.
But more so, I am just transferring this note into this prose. So
yeah. Be
careful with stuff like that, because then you're almost like, I don't know. I wanted to say you're almost like plagiarizing yourself, but that's a little touchy-feely. I mean, essentially, you're saying I am going to take my ideas, and my ideas are the only thing that's important for this. It's the actual craft of putting words together, or being able to read. I just had the thought of something I was going to say to you earlier, and I lost it.
All right. Well, I guess we're both doing that right now. But I feel like it would be For me, it would be a lot. It would be really tedious, Vince, to like spend a whole lot of time on planning. Like, here is exactly what I'm gonna do, and writing all that down, and then going in and like that would be the fun part, and then actually making the story would be the tedious and irritating and not fun part. Like, I don't want to look at it like a house. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't want to look at it.
the foundation.
Yeah, but what I mean is I don't want to look at it like blueprint and then construction.
Yeah. Which I was always okay with that.
Oh boy, not me.
Sort of.
See, like I said earlier, there is. Let me expand on something that I said earlier. I think that there can be, a difference between planning and outlining. What I mean is, when you sit down and just go totally freeform, you can, of course, make your work look like you don't have any forethought, because you don't. I think it's very. I think if you're savvy and you're creative and you're really thinking about your continuity, and then this helps more even in revision, you can actually have no idea where you're going and still make it look like you did all along. Like I think that's definitely a thing that can be done. And sometimes your best ideas will come in like that, where you're not thinking you're thinking about it as a storyteller and not as like I said, somebody who's doing construction work. So you don't have to start completely from nothing in your brain and then you start putting things on paper. I don't mean that. Like I said, I often write toward an ending, and I often will have you'll have an idea of who people are. You'll have your basic concept of your story, and then you're writing toward reveals. So you're like, I know there are these things that I'm gonna, just a skeleton loose, I know that I'm gonna want to eventually reveal in this story, and then it's just a matter of being not melodramatic but dramatic about it.
I do think there's something to be said for
Finding
experience.
Compelling ways to, yeah, and that's the thing that I keep kind of running into while we're talking about this is I keep wanting to come at things from a personality place, and then a lot more of it is just I've done a lot of it. Like,
the more of something you do, the more comfortable you are with it, and then the more of the ways of making something come into being you are capable of employing on the fly.
Yeah.
And I think, like, for example, somebody who's just getting into painting is probably going to put a sketch on that page, or is going to put a sketch on the canvas first, because they don't have a form in their head that they go, well, if I put down this color first, it'll blend with this color, which will lead me into this form if I do this and then this and then this. But you see an artist who can just freehand something. They show up and they say, well, I'm going to put this color here and then this color here, and then before you know it, you have a shape that started as an amorphous blob, and now you have something that is a fully recognized form, but it's not these definitive lines. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's maybe not fair to say that you get better just by doing it.
No, that's true.
You know, I mean, like, because that's a thing that I've always kind of thought to a degree, and I still to a degree believe that. Where like
there's some people that just can't carry
the work and really. But see, I don't even want to say that for this. I really feel like there's kind of a writer in everybody. I think it's a thing that everyone can to some degree learn how to do, at least some kind of writing. I don't feel like singing is necessarily that way. So I mean, like there's a disconnect with that example. But like you can, I guess you could like write for years, but have no structure and have no guidance and just keep writing crap forever. I mean, I guess you know that can happen. So to your painting example, it's like, if you paint forever, will you become a good painter? Not necessarily.
You'll become a better painter.
But I also don't think. Yeah, but like if you never actually learn like the ins and outs of it. Like, if you paint forever but nobody ever teaches you what perspective is, then are you going to get better? I'm saying if you really get better just by raw doing it. And with writing, I've always felt like you kind of do. Like I always suggest that people when they, and this is the thing I think that I was going to say earlier, that you sit down and you do the work and don't be worried about how good it is. You know what I mean? Like write what you want to write on the page, because even if it's terrible, now you can look at it and know what not to do. But then what you need after that is guidance. Because see, Vince and I both come from a writing workshop background.
Oh, yeah.
And it would be stupid for me to say that people should try to get great at writing with zero guidance, because I purposefully went to school to get better at my craft. I also, we answered this question last week, don't think that you need formal education. But I think that
you need education of some kind. Self-education, formal education, something.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, like, you need a mentor or good books or something just to help, or just the right eyes on the page. But you need somebody to give you constructive criticism of, this is working or this isn't. I understand this, I don't. Because after all, writing a story is all about communication. And if it only works in your head, what was the point of writing it down? Besides just, you can remember it. You know what I mean? So you want to make something that it has a logical progression that other people can read and they understand what they're looking at, but also is presented in a compelling and interesting and dramatic way, as opposed to just reading like a textbook or whatever. You could have a great story, you could have great story ideas, but not know how to make them entice people. So I mean, like, all of those things are important, and those are all things that you're not necessarily gonna get just by writing every day. At the same time, I think it's important to write every day.
If you're an artist,
but back to outlining. I'm sorry.
If you're an artist who is never taught the rules of perspective, the best you can be is Todd McFarlane.
But see, he's self-taught.
See what I'm saying? But that's it. That's the best you can be. Your perspective's always going to be a little askew.
Yeah, but he does that on purpose. I mean, like, man.
So he says.
I don't know. Todd McFarlane is one of my favorite artists. I mean, like, if you can, if your best is Todd McFarlane, and I think you're pretty darn good. But
I'm not saying you're bad.
But then, as I've said before with Spawnier, that's a guy who tried to self-teach himself to write, and that didn't work out so well. So, yeah. But anyway, final thoughts, Vince.
I think outlining is worthwhile. I think, especially in those early days, you should try it and give yourself some focus.
But don't you think that a lot of things, especially when we go to, and of course we're talking primarily about books and short stories and things, prose, don't you think especially when we get to a lot of Hollywood stuff and that sort of thing, that outlines are kind of killers? That they can be, where we're like, because a lot of outlines, and I'm not saying everybody does this, but I mean, you get a lot of things where it's clear that something was put together by committee, where you had an outline that was through a formula.
Yeah.
And it's not characters making choices that drive the narrative. It's this, we have to, because what happens is sometimes, this is the point I'm trying to make, is that sometimes somebody will. And I realize that this is not the kind of outline you're talking about, but I just want to reiterate this because I think it's important that people will write an outline and say they want these things to happen, and then they have to contrive something or make silly excuses to make a character do something out of character, or like have really lame, easy things happen to get to that next plot point because they have an outline and that's what's supposed to happen next.
They can say things like,
really careful about that. I feel like if I wrote by outline, I'd throw the outline away really fast because it just wouldn't go that direction. But again, maybe not everybody writes the way I write. But I'm just saying that while I'm getting in my groove. Let me ask you this, because maybe you don't write the same way I do. Do you feel like your stories tend to write themselves, or are you like making them happen?
I feel like they tend to write themselves.
Well, see, then that just completely confuses the crap out of me, because that's how I feel about mine. Like, when I really get in my groove, I'll look back on it 3 hours later and be like, I barely even remember putting this on the page. And I feel like if I outlined it, like maybe, but like, are your stories writing themselves when you're outlining, or are they writing themselves when you're writing them, is my question.
In my head, both.
Okay.
Because, I mean,
interesting. Okay.
I'm not sitting here going, well, then this would happen because that's what I would do. I kind of obsess over something, and I don't recommend being anal and obsessive. I mean, but I am. So I get into it, and then I feel like I have a body of work that I'm kind of meh on, but then I have one good short story that I feel is the piece of the meh that I've made. So, which it's unavoidable. You're going to make a bunch of meh.
That's exactly what I always tell people, and you have to allow that to happen.
So when I think about my process, I think about the process that I've done with everything that I've made, and then kind of how it culminated to do its best. So I make an outline, and then I revise the outline, and then I revise the outline, because now I have this series of events, and I'm like, well, it doesn't make sense for a guy that would want to do this for this to happen. And then I might sit down and write a little bit, but then when I know I really have my footing, it all comes out in a big string of word vomit. And this, I once had somebody say...
I think that's okay.
I think it's okay too. I mean, because now
again, that's what revision's for, and that's okay. Because what about the gems that come out of that you wouldn't have had?
I guess what I'm saying is by making a really intensive outline, it's not so much that I've made the blueprint, but I've studied the thing in my head to where I know what it is, so therefore it all writes itself.
Okay.
So now I have this thing that I can refer back to if I ever get lost on plot points. But like, for example, in a short story I wrote, the teacher that read it said, she said, Vince, I really like this dialogue you have here. Some of it's so minimalistic, but it's very true to who I think these characters are. And I said, thanks, I don't even remember writing that section. So yeah. I mean, I did, because that seems like an unlawful and untruthful thing to do. Here, read this, teacher. But so that's kind of where I go from it. I'm like, oh, look, here we go. That's what I'm just going now. That's what these guys would say to each other.
See, my process is a little bit more ethereal than that, and probably to some people would sound like unrealistic and silly, and like it doesn't really work this way. But it does for me, where I don't.
He turns into God.
Let me start this. Well, I do.
And it's ethereal.
I do somewhat think of it that way. I think that when you create a world, you're like the god of your own world. I mean, part of the fun of writing is you get to play God now. Part of the fun is you get to play God. The other part of the fun is you get to lie to people and make them believe lies. Because if what you're writing is really compelling to people in the moment, and you make them emotional about non-living fictional creatures, that's cool. That's power. I love that. Same
reason I thought about getting into law.
Oh, interesting. I love that. But anyway, with that mentality, I'm kind of glad you didn't. But anyway, I'm sorry. What I was going to say is, let me start with this. I think that it's a good idea. In lieu of meticulous outlining, to plan things to write down some details to help you decide who your characters are, because I think that I always think that plotting from a character place is important, and that starting from characters, sometimes even before premise. I mean, I find it much easier to make up a really interesting character and say, okay, what would the premise be? Sometimes I don't even have my genre yet. Like, if I'm going to write a genre thing, sometimes I don't even know what the genre is until I created a character. And so you start with a character, and I'm not saying this is the only way to do it. I'm just saying this is the way I like to do it. You start with a character, and in lieu of an outline, Vince, I like to write lists. I like to write a list of, like, I've got this female character. What kinds of things does she have in her purse? What kinds of things does she have, as I said earlier, like in her kitchen? And then you plan out things like, does she have kids? Where does she work? Those sorts of things. So not planning what's going to happen, but planning the status quo, and then you break it. And I don't need an outline to break that status quo. I know what it is. I know who this person is, and then I break that status. Now, as I'm doing it,
suddenly she's a chicken.
As I'm doing it in the moment, I'm learning more about her. Like, she's coming even more alive as I'm going through it, which again is part of the reason I can't. So when I say that it's kind of ethereal and it feels like almost like this out-of-body experience, the deal is, it's not, it doesn't feel like me writing it. It feels like these characters doing things and I'm just telling you what they're doing. And that's why outlines are difficult for me. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I'm saying? Because that's my approach. I mean, I feel like these people are doing what they're going to do, and it's not me thinking what would I do. It's me just knowing what these characters would do next. And that's what I mean when I say it writes itself, is that like these characters are doing things and I'm just telling you what they're doing. It's like something kind of comes over you. It's almost like a Ouija board. And that's
how I type too.
And that's but that's what I love about it. That's why it's fun for me. Is like you're creating, there's this weird midpoint where you are creating, but it also feels like it's being created through you. And again, I'm not saying that it's an actual like spiritual experience. I'm not trying to be sappy about it. I'm just saying that when it's working, that's what it feels like for me.
I do feel like there's kind of you've created a mental construct, and these things interact with one another that come to a logical conclusion, or come to an illogical conclusion. I mean, you have to let your characters be imperfect and lie and yada yada yada.
Yeah.
But I kind of like that idea, because I feel like you're studying your characters while you're writing. I'm studying my characters while I'm outlining.
Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like. We just have very different approaches.
And you come up with a construct that becomes a person. Makes sense? Here's the amorphous form.
Yeah.
And then here is the figurine that I've made out of a Barbie doll.
And Vince, I hope you don't feel like I'm telling you your way's wrong.
Oh, no.
It's me trying to understand the way you do it, because it's
I kind of feel like I just now understood something about myself.
Yeah,
because I was like, outlines are great, and then I'm like, well, maybe it's not the outline that's the great thing for me. Maybe it's the study period where I get to learn about the idea that I had. Now it's now a full thing because of the outline.
Yeah. And I think that, again, the same kind of thing can happen with Liz. I'm also not saying that I have never done anything akin to an outline, but certainly not as structured as yours. Like when I wrote my novel, it was originally a series of short stories. And I originally came up with it not even being all that serious about I'm going to do this. I don't know if I've told you this, Vince, but originally my book was me plotting out what a season of a TV show would look like.
Oh, yeah.
It was just a thing I was doing for fun, because I came up with this idea that this would make a great TV show. So what I did was I started just writing short, like 4 or 5 sentence plot synopses of each episode. And that turned into the book. Now, all that stuff got moved around and stuff, but some of the basic ideas of those stories became the ideas of the chapters. And that's why there are a whole lot of kind of, episodes inside that book where it feels like there are some sort of mini stories that are carrying that larger narrative throughout that book, because it was structured that way. So I'm not saying that I don't do a little bit of something you might call outlining, but I'm sure you would agree that what I'm describing is very, very different from what you do.
Yeah, I mean, it's less intensive, but in my head, it's a loose outline as opposed to a like fully jotted down outline. I gotta get this crap on page.
Yeah, I mean, I also don't do that I've never done that for anything else. Obviously, as everybody knows, I didn't do that with Spawn here.
Well, it's a different beastie.
But then, yeah, no, it is. But again, that's part of why I'm somewhat of a proponent of not. And again, I'm not saying that your way is bad. I'm just like, part of the reason I don't is because so much of what I ended up loving that we put in that show would not have been there had I done it that way.
That's true.
Because it all came later.
Oh god, it was a very different thing when it was first started.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have been nearly as much fun, I don't think.
I kind of agree with that.
Not to talk too much about our own work. It's just just examples of why we work the way we do. But anyway, I hope that answers your question. It's really fun, Vince, when we can give people a couple different answers.
Yeah,
both totally valid, of course.
This kind of makes me want to get back to it.
Well, you should. There's nothing stopping you. Well, everybody, thanks always for watching. We sure appreciate it.
Except I don't have fingers.
If there's anything you'd ever like us to talk about here on Geeks Not Nerds, send us a personal message on Geekvolution. You can also leave comments, but we don't always get to the comments. We get a lot of comments. We just don't always have a chance to read everything. So send us a personal message if you want to make sure that we see your question, and we will consider it down the road. Also, if you asked things for the multi-topic extravaganza that did not get answered, we will try to do some full shows down the road on our favorites. And thanks again for watching. We will see you again next week. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Vince, reminding you to support your local comic book store!